Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about how the United States is trying to take away half of Taiwan's chip production capacity. Mainland China really has Trump to thank for this. In addition, Russian drones have reached many European countries. Putin's actions are not aimed at China, but are meant to put pressure on Trump. After Trump took office, the pressure on Taiwan has been extraordinary. Besides imposing temporary reciprocal tariffs on Taiwan on August 7th, the US is also continuing its efforts to seize Taiwan's chip production capacity. On September 27th, the US Secretary of Commerce, in an exclusive interview, Lutnick made a fiery statement. On the one hand, he claimed that a formal tariff and trade agreement between the US and Taiwan would be reached soon. But on the other hand, he openly criticized Taiwan for its complacency and over-reliance on the semiconductor industry. This is not only unhealthy for Taiwan itself, but also makes the US's so-called protection of Taiwan unfounded. In the interview, Lutnick said that the US currently only produces 2% of its chip production capacity, while Taiwan independently supplies 95% of US chips. This high concentration makes the US feel both insecure and unhealthy. He proposed that the US achieve 40% reshoring of chip manufacturing within this administration, and ultimately reach a point where the US and Taiwan each have 50% chip production capacity. In order to reshape the US chip landscape, he threw out a surprising figure, $500 billion. He believes that this amount must be invested in the United States to establish an integrated chip industry chain covering R&D, design, manufacturing, and packaging. This amount far exceeds the $52 billion in subsidies provided by the CHIPS and Science Act during the Biden administration, and the industry has questioned its feasibility. But in Lutnick's eyes, money is not the problem, but strategy. He even asked Taiwan in a highly sarcastic tone, "If you produce 95% of the chips needed by the United States, why should I protect you? Are you going to put the chips into airplanes yourselves? Or put them on ships and let me protect them?" You need to understand that having general chip manufacturing capacity in the US is crucial for Taiwan. In the interview, Lutnick even directly quoted Trump. He said that this situation is unhealthy for you, and it's also unhealthy for me, who is protecting you. These remarks clearly outline the American logic. Only when a large portion of chip manufacturing capacity is dispersed to the US mainland will the US make security commitments to Taiwan. This means that Taiwan's so-called chip shield, this moat, is being dismantled by the United States. These words are like a wake-up call. For a long time, the Taiwan authorities have regarded the semiconductor industry as their strongest protective talisman, believing that since a large number of chips used by the US are produced in Taiwan, the US would be even more motivated to protect Taiwan and prevent mainland China from taking over Taiwan and threatening US chips. However, Trump does not buy into the DPP's logic, claiming that since chip production capacity is in Taiwan and this is unsafe for the US, it should be moved back to the US in large quantities. He has also used security and economic trade issues to continuously pressure Taiwan. Now, Lauterbach has openly linked security protection to the relocation of the chip industry, making it clear that the US is no longer hiding its transactional logic. Taiwan must either cooperate in moving its chip industry back to the US or bear the risk of losing American protection. This is not diplomatic rhetoric, but a blunt threat. It reveals the way the Trump administration extends its foreign policy, using economic leverage to force the other side to make concessions and treating security protection as a bargaining chip. When Trump took office, he immediately threatened to a 100% tariff was imposed on Taiwanese chips. At the time, it was stated that if a chip factory was built in the United States, the tariff would be exempted. However, TSMC announced in March of this year that it would increase its investment in the United States to $165 billion. At that time, the UK and the EU estimated that TSMC would eventually move 30% of its advanced chip production capacity to the United States. However, the Trump administration is now going all out, feeling that 30% is not enough and demanding that 50% of Taiwan's chip production capacity be moved to the United States. The problem is that the Taiwanese authorities do not have much bargaining chips, which puts them in a dilemma. If they do not move production capacity to the United States, they may lose the guarantee of security commitments. If they cooperate in moving production capacity, they will sever their economic lifeline, weakening the core industry that supports Taiwan's international status. Some scholars have bluntly stated that if the 50-50 chip split idea comes true, it will have a huge impact on Taiwan's economy. However, TSMC alone already accounts for 50% of Taiwan's GDP. If half of Taiwan's 5% of GDP were taken away, it would mean a direct loss of 2.5% of its GDP. This situation is terrifying, and the DPP government is terrified, but it dares not directly retaliate. On September 29th, Taiwan's Ministry of Economic Affairs stated that trade negotiations with the United States are being coordinated by the Executive Yuan. Currently, relevant negotiations are continuing and future developments are being closely monitored. These words are really just like nothing. Liu Peizhen, deputy director of the Taipei Institute of Industrial Economics, said that the US's new film Made in 5 Points argument has undoubtedly sent shockwaves through Taiwan's trade negotiations and the global semiconductor industry landscape. This proposal is a deep-seated game involving Taiwan's economic security, geopolitics, industrial chain restructuring, and technological dominance. It can be summarized this way. First, the DPP government's strategy has always been to use the US to seek independence, while also claiming that TSMC is Taiwan's direct shield and that the US has no choice but to protect Taiwan. But now the Trump administration is directly trying to seize half of Taiwan's chip business, and there seems to be no room for resistance from the DPP government. They can only let Trump push further and further, being cornered step by step. Taiwan's economic outlook is extremely precarious. Having TSMC is like possessing the Hashibi jade, treasured but also a source of danger. Second, if Taiwan had friendly relations with the mainland, they could have resisted US pressure together. But the DPP government confronts the mainland and relies on US protection, leaving itself with no bargaining chips against the US. This situation isn't necessarily a bad thing for mainland China. Just let Trump take Taiwan away. Additionally, let's talk about Mao Zedong's war and how Russia has sent drones into several European countries such as Poland and Norway. Many people can't figure out what exactly Russia is trying to do. Poland has reacted the most strongly, having once blocked the China-Europe freight trains in an attempt to force China to make Russia stop. In fact, this matter has nothing to do with China. It is only about Putin's strategy. On the one hand, Putin slightly spread the flames of war outward, and on the other hand, he fought a war of attrition in Ukraine, making Ukraine understand that fighting would lead to a dead end. In the early morning of September 20th, Russia launched more than 600 drones and missiles in 9 Ukrainian states, including 579 drones, 8 ballistic missiles, and 32 long-range missiles. These bombings were called the most decisive blows so far this year. He drew an arc of attack across the entire Ukraine. These bombings were not random, but systematic protection. The initial signs of the attack were already visible when the thunder started. Ukraine's ammunition depots were burning red, air defense plants were on fire, and infrastructure in many cities was destroyed. Ukraine faced this. The air defense system was almost destroyed by the swarm offensive. Russia's attack pattern has taken shape. The first wave always uses those cheap suicide drones, mainly those Shaked 136 drones that the soldiers called flying lawnmowers. These cheap drones only cost $35,000 each. Their mission is simple: to force Ulan to burn expensive air defense missiles. Those foreign-made air defense missiles, those made in the United States and aided by Europe, cost $4 million each. You can imagine how expensive it is to use them to intercept drones. This means that Russia can launch large-scale Shaked 136 drone attacks almost every day. When the defense system of one is almost completely depleted by these swarms, the real killer aircraft, ballistic missiles and long-range missiles will appear. According to the Russian Firepower Strike Tracking Analysis report released by the Center for Strategic and International Studies in September this year, Russia's airstrikes have become normalized, with more than 700 ammunition deployed in a single attack, and the time between each attack is only a few days before another attack. Since September last year, Russia has significantly increased the use of Saudi Ring aircraft from about 200 per week to about 1,000 per week this year. This is a huge consumption of Volan's epidemic prevention system and a serious economic burden. The impact of the attack is unknown. By mid-June last year, Russia's attacks had destroyed 9 gigawatts of Volan's domestic power generation capacity, and Volan's winter peak consumption is 18 gigawatts, which means that half of Volan's power generation capacity has been destroyed. The military had been destroyed, and every substation destroyed by missiles and drones meant a city was plunged into darkness. Every ammunition depot destroyed meant a position on the front lines would be deprived of artillery support. Russia's strategy was not simply destruction, but systemic paralysis. First, Russia was clearly engaged in a war of attrition. Every bombing campaign conveyed a single message. The battlefield had extended to every corner of Volan, far from the front lines, from power plants to chemical plants, from command centers to logistics hubs. Russia and Volan's allies had also issued warnings. Even with Western aid, Musk still had gaps in civilians' defenses, until Conan and even the Western countries that supported them were wiped out. Second, in fact, Putin doesn't really want to fight. He wants to negotiate. But he wants to use the Korean War model, that is, to stop the war where it is, without returning the land that has already been occupied. However, Zelensky does not accept this model. Putin is now forcing him to accept it. Third, the main party putting pressure on Putin is Trump. Putin feels that Trump doesn't listen to him and that the pressure on Zelensky is not enough. He believes that as long as the US cuts off its supply of weapons to Ukraine, the war will have to stop. Russia is also flying drones to other European countries, which is just increasing the noise and indirectly putting pressure on Trump. However, Trump can't bring himself to make such a controversial move and force Xi Jinping to stop the war. Recently, the US even said it would supply Ukraine with Attack-MS cruise missiles, which is escalating the situation, not cooling it down. But Putin is not afraid of fighting a war of attrition with the US and the West. It just depends on whether the Western economy collapses first or Russia does.